Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the first STEM Lyceums webinar of 2024. My name is Devin Simmons, the STEM Lyceums Program Manager, and I am thrilled to present to you our Science Behind Sports webinar sponsored by the Claude Moore Charitable Foundation. The Center for Excellence in Education was founded in 1983 by Joanne DeGennaro and the late Admiral H.G. Rickover, who is the father of the nuclear navy and civilian uses of nuclear power. CEE's mission is to nurture high school and university scholars to careers of excellence and leadership in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and encourages collaboration between and among scientific and technological leaders in the global community. You may visit CEE's website to learn more about the center's cost-free programs for students and teachers, such as the Research Science Institute, USA Bio-Olympiad, Teacher Enrichment Program, and STEM Lyceums. We are pleased to have two extremely insightful speakers for today's webinar, Dr. Eli Olenek and Dr. Megan Murphy. Eli Olenek is an associate professor in operations research and engineering management at Southern Methodist University's Bobby B. Lyle School of Engineering. He holds a BS in applied mathematics from Brown University and earned an MS and PhD in industrial engineering and operations research from UC Berkeley. He is also a 1984 alum of CEE's Research Science Institute. Dr. Olenek research focuses on applied optimization and network design problems, securing over $2 million in grants. With 28 published articles, he contributes significantly to operations, research, and network engineering. His leadership roles include past presidency of the Informs Technical Section on Telecommunications in the Dallas-Fort Worth Informs chapter, an associate editor for International Transactions in Operational Research and Networks, and a co-founder of the Riot Sports website. Megan Murphy is Director of Health Promotion Management and Clinical Associate Professor at Southern Methodist University in the Department of Applied Physiology and Sports Management in Dallas, Texas. Dr. Murphy graduated from Texas Lutheran University with a BS in molecular biology and completed her doctoral work at University of North Texas Health Science Center in Biomedical Sciences and Integrative Physiology. At SMU, she teaches undergraduate coursework in physiology and is involved in Exercise is Medicine, an initiative to increase physical activity in all campus citizens. Her research interest includes exercise and mindfulness as a method of stress reduction in college students. Dr. Murphy is a Richardson resident where she and her partner are raising their 3 children, dog Pepper, and hamster Butterscotch. Welcome, Dr. Olenek and Dr. Murphy. And at this time, I'm going to allow Dr. Olenek share his screen. During his presentation, he will be asking the audience members questions, so feel free to answer those questions in the chat portion of the webinar, and Dr. Olenek will be able to read them. So I'm going to stop sharing, or Dr. Olenek's taking it away.
Oh, sorry.
No worries.
Sorry, Devin.
No worries, and I'm going to turn off my screen so Dr. Olenek can have the spotlight.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for that kind introduction, Devin. And thank you, everyone who's joined in. As Devin said, I am an alumni from RSI, and I was also a counselor there for 2 years. And it's an awesome program. I loved it. I still have friends that I'm close to from way back then. And so I would encourage all of you to look into it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what operations research is and how it relates to sports specifically. Part of what I want to do is kind of promote my field because it's not that well known outside of kind of sort of university and business settings. So most students that come in to SMU as first year students aren't aware of it, but I think it's a really, really great program. Okay, so if I can see the chat, am I still sharing? Yeah. So I was just curious to ask, just put in the chat, what comes to mind when you think of science and sports? So what kind of things would come to mind? Yeah, electrolytes. Okay, that's an excellent suggestion. Sports. What else? Anything else? Okay, so I'm going to just give you like some of the things that I think come to mind right away. One is equipment and how technology and science have improved athletes' performance by making better and better equipment. So you pick any, pretty much any sport that has equipment, and almost all of them do. It's fun to look at the evolution of the equipment that's used there. My wife has been kind of hooked on the Australian Open right now. So for me, the evolution of tennis rackets came to mind. You can see, we started out as wooden rackets with, I'm not even sure what they used for strings. Now they've got graphite and extremely, they can make the webbing extremely tight. And the tennis balls are moving so much faster now than they used to. And so that's an advance applying, technology and science to improve performance. Here's another kind of example. This is a sideline shot from an NFL game. We can see that you've got a couple of players and a coach, and they're looking at some kind of device. I think it's probably a Microsoft Surface, and which has been ruggedized, so it won't get broken on the sideline. And they're using that to look at, probably film of video of what just happened when they were on the field. They're analyzing what they did right, maybe what they did wrong, maybe looking for some weakness they can exploit from the other team. And you'll notice the coach has a headset on. So that's enabling him to talk to other coaches who are elsewhere in the stadium, with a view looking down. So they're looking at kind of an aerial view. Probably also, they've probably all got computers, and they're giving him advice as the game goes on. So there's some examples of technology really like changing the game in real time. Somebody mentioned electrolytes, so you see there's some Gatorade here. So another thing that I think most people would think of quickly, or would come to mind quickly, is improvements in understanding of nutrition and diet and so forth, as well as training methods. Right, so these are all ways to help the athletes perform better. And I won't say too much about this because that's getting into Dr. Murphy's wheelhouse. And instead, I want to talk a little bit about analytics, what that is, and how that applies to sports. And I apologize for this slide being a little wordy. I did a lot of definitions, and I found a couple that I thought were nice and concise, and so I want to make sure I got those down right. So I have a degree in operations research, and I'm in an operations research department. And this is a nice definition. It's using a scientific process, mainly math, to transform data into insights for making better decisions. So this often comes up in a business context or a military context, but there's lots and lots of applications. Analytics is pretty similar. And it's the idea of also applying science and math methods to the study and analysis of problems involving complex systems. And we usually talk about sort of three different types of analytics. There's descriptive, which is essentially studying what happened in the past. So collecting data, looking for trends in the data, patterns in the data. That gives you some insight into what happened before. And then you want to try to use that to do what we call predictive analytics, which is make predictions about what is likely to happen in the future. And then where these two fields really overlap is in this last part, prescriptive analytics, which is using the descriptive and predictive part to make good decisions, make good allocations of resources, and make things like that. So sports analytics is simply the application of operations research ideas or analytics in the context of sports. And I want to switch my share over to a short video that I think does an excellent job of illustrating what exactly that is. And so I'm going to go ahead and play this video. It's about 2 minutes long, but it's excellent at describing sports analytics.
They're going to go for it.
It's fourth down. The pressure is mounting.
Oh, man.
Decisions have to be made.
Now what do?
Do they kick it or risk it all and go for it?
Go for it, go for it, go for it, go for it, go.
For a coach, this decision puts it all on the line.
I can't believe they're going to do this.
If it's the right call,
Penny rolling out, throws it. Help! Only Andy Reid gets it shotgun on 4th and an inch.
they're a genius.
There's no doubt. There's no tomorrow. Let's go.
But if it's the wrong call,
It's a disaster. Jim, they got a punt there.
What was that call?
introducing the Next Gen Stats Decision Guide powered by AWS. Next Gen Stats and AWS are crunching the numbers to give fans an inside look into the decision-making process of NFL coaches on fourth down.
Coaches, go for it.
To illustrate how it works, let's take a look at the 2020 Week 15 matchup between the Colts and Texans. It's a tie game. 3:21 remaining in the fourth quarter, the Colts had the ball with 4th and inches from the Texans' 36-yard line. Big decision time. Should Frank Reich go for it to extend the drive, or try and take the lead with a 54-yard field goal? Machine learning can help us break down the numbers. From a fan's point of view, it can seem like the Colts have a full yard to go, but Next Gen Stats tracking data tells us the ball is only 9 inches from the first down marker, less than a foot. Factoring this into a machine learning algorithm, along with a wealth of other game data, it tells us that the Colts have an 81% chance of converting on 4th and inches, which is much better than the 42.4% chance of making a 54-yard field goal. By combining each conversion probability with its impact on winning the game, we can calculate the Colts have a 69% chance of winning if they go for it, but only a 56% chance if they kicked. A 13% difference. The Next Gen Stats Decision Guide, powered by AWS, tells us go for it is the optimal call. As for the coach's play call,
On the sneak, and he got the first down.
and what happens when you make the right call and the players execute?
And he's in. The Colts have it.
Victory. How sweet it is.
Okay, so that is a really good summary, I think, introduction to what sports analytics is all about. And let me switch hold on a second, share back to, there we go. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go through next like a couple of sort of smaller scale examples. You saw in the video they mentioned machine learning, which is a term you may have heard that gets a lot of play in the news. Algorithms, data, probabilities, decisions, right? All of that, combining all of that is analytics, and the goal at the end is to make a good decision. So we saw the example of deciding whether to go for it on 4th down or not. And I didn't look this up, but I'm quite sure that in the recent years, we've seen teams go for it on 4th down much more frequently than they used to, and from much farther back from the goal line than they used to. And it's because of analytics like we saw in the video. So here's an example that I like to use in a couple of my classes. So it's about the medley relay, which is a swim race. We'll see it in the Olympics that are coming up this summer. And if you're not familiar with it, it's 4 swimmers. Each one swims 100 meters of a particular stroke in the order that I've listed here. And so as a decision problem here for the coach. So if the coach has data on what each swimmer's average times are, or maybe what they predict their likely times are in each of the different strokes, then they have to decide which swimmer is going to swim which stroke. And so kind of a natural approach you might take is to start out with the first one, the backstroke, and see, okay, who's my fastest backstroker? That's John. So I'll have John do that. And then who's my fastest breaststroke swimmer? That's Paul. All right. So then we go over to butterfly. And the fastest butterfly swimmer is John, but he's already doing backstroke. So I got to give him something else. But so I'll have to give butterfly to someone else. I'll have Ringo do that because Ringo's he's like my second best swimmer. And then that leaves George to do the freestyle. Right. So that's one possibility. And if we, add up the individual times, then we'll get the time for the team as a whole, or be about 4 minutes and 8 seconds. So that's one possible way to do it. There are lots of them. And so part of what we do in study of OR and the study of analytics is work on finding algorithms that can find us the best possible arrangement or best possible assignment in a situation like this. And it's not always the most intuitive method that turns out to be the best. So if we apply like the one of the best algorithms for doing this, we'll get a slightly different arrangement. So we'll keep John with the backstroke, but we'll move George to breaststroke, and Ringo still does butterfly, and then Paul's doing freestyle instead of George, and that is going to give us a time that's more than 4 seconds faster. Still not a great time if you follow competitive swimming, but at least that's the fastest I can get out of this group. And by using the right algorithm, we've made a pretty big improvement over what might be sort of the intuitive way to do it. And so to go back to the operations research field, this is an example of what we call an assignment problem. So in a kind of industrial setting, we usually think of it as, okay, maybe there's N workstations or N workers, and there are N different tasks or jobs that have to be performed all at the same time. And so you have to put one worker on each job, and each job has to have one worker. And we want to see what's the best possible arrangement that we could do to do that as efficiently as possible. And so just this simple example can highlight the power of using efficient algorithms, and that's really sort of my particular area within the field of operations research. One way we might try to go about finding the best arrangement here is just by enumerating all the possibilities. So, for example, in with the medley relay, there's 4 choices for who's going to swim the first stroke. And then after that, there'd be 3 left for the next one, and so forth. So that's not too many, but as a general principle, if we have N jobs and N workers, the number of possible arrangements or assignments is N factorial. And if you haven't seen that symbol before, it just means you take the N times N minus 1 times N minus 2 all the way down to 2. And so, as I said, for like a relay race with 4 swimmers, that's not too bad. That's not too many combinations to look for. But what we're really interested in my research area is how that process scales. And so it turns out that as the number of assignments or the number of jobs gets bigger, the number of arrangements you'd have to look at grows incredibly fast. And so fast that even for kind of a modest sized example, you can't really do it by just simply listing out every possible combination. And so I like to use this example. It's maybe a little bit out of date, but at the time I put this together, which was I think a couple years ago, the fastest computer in the world was running at about 33.8 petaflops. So what's a petaflop? Well, petaflop is a large group of teraflops. So a teraflop is 1 trillion floating point operations per second. So that's where the flop part comes. So 10 to the 12 floating point operations. And for our discussion, we can think of a floating point operation as just being kind of like a basic operation that a computer might do. So adding 2 numbers together, multiplying 2 numbers, comparing 2 numbers to see which one's bigger. Those are sort of like floating point operations. And so the world's fastest computer can do a petaflop. So that's 1,000 teraflops. So 10 to the 15, a really big number. So this is an extremely fast computer. So you would think that it could solve a problem like this by enumeration really fast. Well, let's assume, and this is kind of a little bit of a stretch, let's just assume that with one flop, or one floating point operation, we can test one arrangement and see how, like if we're assigning swimmers to strokes, like, add up the total time, or if it's workers to jobs, usually there's a kind of an efficiency score for having worker A do job C and so forth. So if we could do one assignment per flop and we had only 25 jobs, that would take 14.5 years on this computer just doing it by looking at all the possibilities. So that's doable, but you probably wouldn't be too interested in the answer by the time you got it, right? It wouldn't be too useful 14 years later. If we double the number of jobs, here's where the factorial thing comes in. The number of years that it would take to go through all the combinations, you can see it jumps up enormously, right? So now it's like 2.8 times 10 to the 40th years. That's a really, really long time. And then if we double the number again, so let's say we want to get 100 possibilities, that's like 8.7 times 10 to the 100th years. So if you're interested in geology at all, then you might know that the current estimate for the age of the Earth is about 4.5 billion years. So that's 10 to the 9th. So what that means is if we had, we had this computer available when the Earth first, finally formed from, after the Big Bang and all that, and we started counting right then, it still wouldn't have gone through all the possible combinations for 50 workers or 100 workers. But if you use the right algorithm, solving it with 100 workers, 100 jobs is no problem, right? You can do that in about a second on, typical laptop computer today. It would probably take more time to organize the data in the right format to feed it into the algorithm than it would for the algorithm to actually run on a computer and solve it. So this is kind of one of the takeaways from what I'd like to take away from today is if you're interested in this kind of thing, this is what we do in operations research. And in order to be able to have the coach in real time in a football game, go through the possibilities of how likely they are to win if they go for a field goal or try from fourth down, then you have to be able to go through lots and lots and lots of possibilities really quickly. And so you need an efficient algorithm to do that. And another example this is what I love to do in class. It's probably one of my favorite examples. And in a way, this is what got me interested in this whole area to start with. It's a little bit old. It's just going back to 1996. At that time, I was in grad school in Berkeley, California. So I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I was following the Giants. And interested to know at any point how close are they or likely to win the pennant, which means come in first place in their division. And then if they can do that, then they can go to the playoffs. And so this is an example you can see from September 8th, 1996. At that point, there were only 4 teams in the National League West. And if you're not used to looking at these kind of standings tables, it's just showing you these are the 4 teams in the first column. The next column, how many games each team has already won, how many teams they've lost. Then they usually show you something called games back, which we can kind of skip. If you're familiar with these standings, then you understand that. If you don't, it's not really crucial. The final column where it says left, that's how many games that team has left to play in the season. So when we're looking at this, if we're a Giants fan, we see that they're not doing very well, but they have 22 games left. They've already won 59. If by some miracle, they go on a really big winning streak and let's say they win all 22 of those games, then they'll end up with an 81 total for the whole season. It's not unlikely, but it's possible. And 81 is more than the number of wins that the team that's currently in first place, that's the Dodgers, it's more than that. So kind of by the traditional sports media analysis, we would say that the Giants are not mathematically eliminated from first place. So there's still a mathematical possibility that they could finish in first place by that reasoning. Another way that people sometimes talk about this is by using something called a magic number. And I don't really have time to go into where that comes from, but you can kind of see it's pretty closely related to the first equation that I wrote. And the idea is that if this magic number is telling you what number of wins by the first place team and losses by the other team would eliminate the other team. So in this example, I got 4. And so what that means is, let's say the Giants lose their next game and the Dodgers win their next 3. So 3 + 1 is 4. That would mean that the Dodgers would have eliminated the Giants. And you kind of see that if the Giants lose another game, the most they could win is 80 games. And if the Dodgers, meanwhile, win 3 more games, they'll be at 81. So because this magic number is not 0, then again, we might say, oh, they've still got a chance. Another way, it's really kind of the same logic, is they have more games left than they are games back or behind the Dodgers. So it's another measure. All right. So this is all kind of 3 different ways of using what for a very long time was sort of the standard way of determining if a team still had a chance to make it to first place. So hopefully some of you recognize this guy. This is Yogi Berra. He was one of the all-time greats and also a very funny guy. If you get a chance, if you haven't seen the biography movie that just came out about him recently, it's an excellent movie. I'm sure you enjoy it. But one of the things that Yogi's famous for is his yogiisms. So he'd said things like, "It ain't over till it's over. If you come to a fork in the road, take it." And what was another one he used to say? Nobody goes to that place anymore. It's too crowded. So the thinking here is, well, there's still some chance, right? And so you can't say the Giants are out of it until they're really out of it. Okay, so the thing is, if we have a little bit more data, we can see that actually the Giants were already eliminated from first place at this point. And all we really need to know to do it in this case is that the top 2 teams here, the Dodgers and Padres, they still had 2 games left, or I'm sorry, 7 games left that they're going to play against each other. So they had like a 7-game series. Baseball games don't ever end in a tie. So each of those 7 games is going to be a win for either the Dodgers or the Padres. And so no matter how you split that up, like if you do 3 for the Dodgers, 3 wins and 4 for the Padres, one of those 2 teams will end up at least 82 wins. So that we know that for sure. And the Giants, we already saw the most they could get is 81 wins. So in fact, they actually are already eliminated. Right? So it's not over till it's over. Okay, so I first learned about this example, or an example very close to it, when taking one of the key classes in my graduate program. So Devin mentioned in the introduction that one of my main research interests is network engineering or network optimization, and so that's sort of the study of how to move things efficiently through networks of various types. So it could be a computer network, phone network, cars moving through, or trucks moving through transportation networks. So as part of my graduate training, I studied lots of different mathematical models for that movement of things through networks, and then different algorithms for trying to make that movement as efficient as possible, or build a network that can support the traffic in a way that's as efficient as possible. And so the class that focused on that is called Network Flows, and we use this textbook, which was written by 3 very famous researchers in my field. They're all MIT professors, and this book is about 1.5 inches thick, and it's got lots and lots of applications of using these sort of network models for all kinds of things, and in particular this baseball elimination example. And when the book was first came on the market, they had like a book release party at one of the conferences, and the authors were there, and they were in baseball hats, and I think they gave out popcorn and hot dogs and all that. So anyway, I'm sitting in this class, and the professor is going through this example, and I thought, that's really cool, but it's actually kind of out of date. So I went up to him after class and I said, you don't need to win first place anymore to get to the playoffs. So they've introduced these wildcard teams. And so it's more complicated now because there's like 3 divisions and there's 4 playoff spots. And could we use some of this network theory that we're learning in class to bring this up to date? And so I worked with, so there's my professor, Elon Adler, and there's my thesis advisor, Dorit Hochbaum. So we worked with another student in my class. His name is Al Herrera there. And we worked all the math out for that. And we set up a website where we track these for 4 different leagues. So we do Major League Baseball, the NBA, WNBA, and the Korean Baseball Organization. And we calculate every day during the season how many games each team needs to win to either avoid being eliminated from the playoffs or first place. Or on the other side, like how many do they need to win to ensure that they're definitely going to get first place, right? So they can clinch first place or clinch a playoff spot. And so we started that, around in '96. And that example I showed you with the Giants, that's when we were first doing this. And so, we were running our algorithms every day, and I was checking the newspaper to see how we were doing. And we found this example, and that got really exciting. Didn't get a whole lot of traction with it. And then more recently, I started working with my friend Alexandra Newman. She's on the right. She's a professor at Colorado School of Mines. And so we found some cases where the media got it wrong. So here's an example. Couple years old. Article said the Warriors had clinched playoffs. That was true, but actually, they posted that on March 12th. Our algorithm showed that they actually had clinched it 3 days earlier on the 9th. And the one on the right, this was last year, it was a 2023 season. So MLB announced that the Dodgers had clinched the postseason, and actually it showed on our website that they hadn't, that there was still a possibility that they wouldn't make it into the playoffs. And so they had to retract this announcement, and they didn't actually clinch until a couple days later. Okay, so I think I'm at my time limit, so I'll stop there, and then maybe in the Q&A I'll talk a little bit about more about sort of how it got into this field, but I don't want to take away from Dr. Murphy's time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Olenek. And just as a Cowboys fan, I wish that they would pay attention to their stats a little bit more. Maybe we would still be in the playoffs. But I'm going to now hand it over to Dr. Murphy so she can give her presentation. And again, I'll stop sharing my screen. And if Dr. Murphy has any interactive portions asking the attendees anything, please answer those in the question and answer portion, and we'll take it from there. All right, Dr. Murphy.
Thank you, Devin. And thank you, Dr. Olenek, too, for inviting me as well. It's nice to be here. I am really going to tell you guys a little bit about how I became involved in exercise and sports science. And I was an athlete in high school. I played, just the normal traditional sports, volleyball, basketball. I wasn't super great, but I loved being active and I loved doing it. But I never really saw an opportunity to actually pursue sports science while I was an undergrad or while I was getting my degrees after high school. However, I will say I've always been a science nerd. So I really enjoyed biology. I enjoyed chemistry. I enjoyed my high school A&P class. So I knew that when I went to college, I wanted to study science. So I got my bachelor's degree in molecular biology at Texas Lutheran, as Devin said in the bio. And my original goal was to be an occupational therapist and work with children who had special needs. By the time I graduated, though, that dream had kind of passed and I wasn't really sure what it was that I wanted to do. So one of my professors, and I would kind of state here the importance of actually getting to know and talk to your professors, because they are more than willing to kind of help you figure out what it is you want to do when you graduate. And sometimes with a science degree, it's not intuitive. It can kind of be difficult to see what it applies to. So this particular professor suggested that I reach out to an individual named Peter Raven at the University of North Texas Health Science Center in Fort Worth, where he focuses on cardiovascular control and the autonomic nervous system, which is the nervous system that's responsible for your fight or flight responses, right? Kind of your fear responses. And so I went and talked to Dr. Raven, and he encouraged me to apply to graduate school. And I was accepted, and that kind of became my next pursuit, was my dissertation work and working on a PhD at the Health Science Center. So my work at the Health Science Center, this is really the first time that I realized how I could incorporate, excuse me, exercise into science and sports into science. So I worked on a process by which heart rate and blood pressure are increased during exercise. So we have all these kind of systems in our body that are telling our organ systems how to respond under certain conditions. And when we start exercising, the second you start moving, your heart rate immediately goes up, your blood pressure immediately goes up. You may start sweating, you're going to start breathing faster. Those things happen very quickly as soon as exercise begins. And so what we were kind of studying is the signaling between the organs and the brain that elicit those responses. So in order to do that, this is just, I'm not going to go in detail over the graphic, just to show you that at this point, my focus was on the heart, right? And measurements in the heart, how the heart can tell the brain that you need to increase heart rate and increase blood pressure by nerves that talk to the heart, nerves that talk to our blood vessels. So that's kind of where I started my journey. And I was training to be a physiologist, specifically a autonomic and cardiovascular physiologist. But exercise is the best way to trigger the autonomic nervous system. So, oh, you know what? Hold on. Let me share like that. That makes it better. Okay. So, I brought cyclists, elite cyclists into the lab, and we did a test that's called a VO2 max test that tests their level of fitness, their level of aerobic fitness. So you put them on a bike, we call it a cycle ergometer. It's stationary. You can measure how much power they're putting out. But you can also put this face mask on them that measures the amount of oxygen that they breathe in and the amount of, well, oxygen and CO2 and the amount that they breathe out as well. And from that, we can kind of determine how much oxygen they're consuming. And the more oxygen you can consume, the better your aerobic fitness, essentially. The other thing that we did was something that's called an acetylene rebreathe. So we used the same tube, and they would breathe in a molecule called acetylene, and acetylene dissolves easily into the bloodstream, and then you breathe it back out. And it's a way that we can measure exactly how hard the heart is working while they're exercising. We also put them on a drug that's called metoprolol that lowered their blood pressure, which should make the work more difficult while they're exercising, to look at the differences on that drug. And then finally, I got to do echocardiogram measurements. So I actually, as part of my doctoral work, I got to do a course on how to do echoes, which is kind of unique and amazing. And you use the same kind of ultrasound probe that you would to observe like a pregnant woman to see the baby inside of the belly, but you do that to measure the heart. And then you can actually see the heart in a readout like this, right? So we're looking, this is flipped upside down, so it flips it. When you're using that probe, we've got the left ventricle, the right atrium, and the left atrium. And I would measure the size of the chamber, the thickness of the walls, the blood flowing through the chambers. And that really sparked my interest in fitness and exercise capacity and the adaptations of the heart. So elite athletes have larger hearts that are much more efficient. And to be able to kind of see this firsthand was just extremely exciting for me. So then I went on to complete a postdoc because in my industry, physiology, if you want to go into research at a university, you usually don't go straight from your PhD work. You spend about 3 years working in the lab of someone else while you're developing kind of your own specific research direction or questions. So I was interested in taking that human model of exercise and fitness and transitioning it to animals so that I could actually see what was happening in the brain with that communication system between the organs when you initiate exercise and then the actual output. All of that goes through the brain, as you can see here, right? So I went to work at UT Southwestern with Scott Smith and Jerry Mitchell, where I moved to the muscle side of things, right? So it's the same response, except now when the muscle contracts, the muscle contraction is that information is being sent to the brain. The brain recognizes muscle contraction as effort or work or exercise, and it also communicates with the heart and the blood vessels to increase heart rate, increase blood pressure. So now you can move oxygen around the body to actually meet the work that you're doing, right? To provide the energy for the work that you're doing. And then I'll show you a little bit here of the preps that I would do. So here's where I really got to get my hands dirty and learn some surgical techniques. And then I also got to harvest the brain tissue of rats to stain the brain to see if the protein expression in certain cells had changed based on the exercise that the animals were doing, in a sense. So this is my mentor, Scott Smith. He developed this procedure. This is some of the equipment that we would use in the lab. And we would place a rat on the table here, and we would do what's called a spinal laminectomy, where you isolate the spinal cord and the spinal nerves that come off of the spinal cord, and you place them on an electrode so that you can stimulate them. And then you also isolate the triceps surae muscle, and you place it on a tension transducer, and you can generate tension on the muscle like the animal is exercising. So it simulates like if this leg's running, if you were consistently pulling the muscle. And then we can measure the electrical impulses being sent to the spinal nerves and then up to the brain. And so I was looking at the response to exercise, the blood pressure and heart rate response to exercise in normal rats, and then in rats that had hypertension. So hypertension is a medical condition where you have high blood pressure. Many of you might have family members or individuals who have high blood pressure. And in individuals that have that condition, when they begin exercising, their blood pressure responds in an exaggerated fashion. So it actually gets higher than in a normal person. Blood pressure in both goes up, but it goes up way higher in someone who has high blood pressure. And that could be potentially risky when they start to exercise. This is why you're always told to talk to your physician before you start an exercise program, because this could potentially be a risk. So what we were looking at is the protein expression in the brain, that cardiovascular control center of the brain, to see if there was a difference in the protein expression after exercise in these hypertensive rats. And I won't go into the details of the data, but it turns out there was a significant difference where there was less of that protein expressed in the hypertensive rats. So I spent 3 years working with rats and exercise before I finally decided to come to SMU. And at SMU, I serve as a professor. I also serve as a faculty advisor for our applied physiology and health management students, many of them that are interested in going into sports-related careers, performance training, and then some interested in physical therapy, nursing, and physician's assistant, and those kinds of things. I work with a program called Health Promotion Management, and then I'm also on the leadership team for an initiative called Exercise is Medicine on campus. So I'll just quickly tell you about a couple things I've done here at SMU. One is working with my colleague, Sushmita Purkayastha. we looked at the impact of concussions in college students. So we measured you can use something called transcranial Doppler, which is the same kind of probe with the echoes that we used before. So it's another ultrasound probe that you can put on the temporal lobe, and you can actually see the middle cerebral artery. You can see the blood. You can't see the artery itself, but you can see the blood pulsating through the artery with that probe. And that gives you an indicator of function of the vascular system in the brain, right? So we're looking at these subjects, these collegiate football players who have experienced concussion, and then we are measuring any changes to the blood flow in their brain after that concussion. And then another test that we did was a balance test on force plates that tests their stability and ability to balance, which is another kind of factor that's impacted after concussion. And what we found was that post-concussion, about a week or so post-concussion, so when an individual gets a concussion, they get a series of tests, a battery of tests, right, to determine whether or not they've had a concussion, how their cognitive performance has been impacted. And they continue to do that test for several weeks until they reach the values that they had before they received the concussion. And that's kind of when they're cleared to play. And what our results showed us was that even when they start reporting that their symptoms have gone away and their performance on that test matches what it was before their concussion, their brain vasculature is still showing signs and symptoms of the concussion. So physiologically, they may not have actually fully recovered, even though they're being cleared to play because they're performing adequately on those cognitive tests. Okay, and then the current thing that I'm passionate about doing is really exercise, trying to motivate others to think of exercise as a form of movement, right? As something you adapt into your daily lifestyle. It doesn't have to be something that you spend time doing in a gym. We just need people out and moving because of the impact it has on your health overall. So we do all kinds of things on campus. This was one we did last fall, which was goat yoga. And then we measured stress hormones. So this is how you measure cortisol, where the participants put this little cotton swab in their mouth, they chew on it for about 2 minutes, and then they spit it back out, basically, and we can measure cortisol with that. So what impact does goat yoga have on stress, essentially, are some of the things we're looking at now. And then I want to make sure you guys have time for questions. So these are just some resources, I think, if you're interested in sports science. The American College of Sports Medicine is a great organization, and there are lots of cool articles and information on the Gatorade Sports Science Institute. And then there was a question about recent discoveries, and CTE would be one of them, how repetitive concussions impact brain tissue. You could see here a brain that has CTE and what a normal brain looks like. And then I'll leave this one for another time.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Murphy, and I can agree that working out as often as you can is definitely beneficial to both just your physical and your mental stability. So now it is time for our question and answer portion. So if you have any questions for either Dr. Olenek or Dr. Murphy, please drop them in the question and answer chat, and they will take it away from there. I'm going to clear the ones that were in here. Responding to Dr. Olenek. So don't be shy. Feel free. These two presenters have a wealth of knowledge between them. So please ask any questions that you may have. You got one question, and it says, can OR be used to enhance athletic performance?
Oh, that's a great question. When it's talking mainly about strategy, I believe that it can. Off the top of my head, I can't recall any examples, but I will think on it overnight, and then I'll let Devin know if I come up with them. So one of my colleagues that I mentioned, Alexandra Newman, who works with me on the website, she was a runner in college. And then she still runs. She still works out with the track team at Colorado School of Mines. And she did publish a paper on improving running times. And I don't remember all of the details of it, but she's definitely using operations research to do that.
I don't know if this is operations research, but I know that it's been used too to determine like how many warm-ups an athlete might need before they run their fastest lap. And I've seen it with like the motion capture systems, and I'm sure with the amount of data that's in there, it has to be something like that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That would be a good example, or something like tracking pitch counts and things like that. Trying to find the point where fatigue is starting to set in. Those would be examples. Yeah.
That was a great question from our audience. And they just said thank you. And I have a question for Dr. Murphy, because you mentioned CTE. So has there been any traces of that in, I know it's really big in football because you see a lot of collisions in that sport, but in terms of professional fighting, whether it's boxing or UFC or anything like that, has there been any traces or anything related to CTE in those professional fields?
Yes, actually, UFC, fighting, boxing for sure, even wrestling. So one of the things I was actually, when I was looking for that figure, was Chris Benoit was a wrestler that his brain is kind of been demonstrated to have pretty severe CTE. They've seen it in hockey players, even soccer players with maybe not an acute concussion, but those kind of subconcussive forces over time. I will say it's not every person is going to develop CTE, right? So that I don't want to scare anybody, but taking concussions seriously and perhaps using tools to reduce the number of hits that you have is definitely what's recommended. And even in soccer, they have headgear that you can wear. Nobody wears it, but I'm wondering if in the next 5 years that changes, because it is showing that even in those sports, yeah, athletes have it.
Definitely. Well, thank you for that. I've always wondered that myself. So there is still a little bit more time for our question and answer portion. If you don't get a chance to ask your question, feel free to email me and I can send those questions over to both Dr. Murphy and Dr. Olenek and get you a response that way. But I don't want to miss out on any questions that we may have right now. So I'm going to open it up for about 1 more minute. And if there's no questions after that minute, then I can go ahead and conclude our webinar. So just going to give it about 1 more minute. Oh, we got one. This question says, speaking of CTE, is it more or less common for certain demographics, and is it recoverable? Thank you. That's a great question.
Good question. So I am not aware of any demographic related research. It's mostly based on the sport that you play, right? So males and females are at risk, different ethnicities are at risk. It's just the sport that you play. And then it is not recoverable. So it is also not a condition that you can diagnose until after death. So you just kind of see gradual degeneration over time, really, some kind of behavioral issues or mood issues, and then dementia kind of related behaviors like memory loss and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So to build off of that question, what would you say to the individuals when we see a ex-professional athlete, whether it's football, professional fighting, that display those things, but it may not, because you see a lot of their actions may be CTE related, but how do you sort of change that conversation to where it may not just be CTE, they may have something else going on with them?
Right. And that's what's difficult too, is we can't actually demonstrate that these sports cause CTE because we can only look at it after death. And the brains that are being donated are individuals that are largely having those concerns. It's not every brain that you're looking at. Right. So, yeah, that's a great question. I think just mental health in general in sports needs to be paid attention to. And if an athlete is experiencing those symptoms, I think there need to be real conversations about whether or not they continue playing. And that goes for a student or athletes that are as young as high school, right? There are some high school athletes that have been shown to have CTE after death. And so I think we just need to continue to have these conversations with our athletes and maybe look at the bigger picture, right? That sport only lasts for,
a short amount of time.
years. Yeah, exactly. And then you have the rest of your life to live. So what kind of quality of life do you want? Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So we have 3 more questions, and these are going to be our last questions, so I can go ahead and let our presenters go and also just conclude the webinar. So the first question is, could you point out which areas still AI is lacking research?
Well, one thing I would say, and this goes off of something that Dr. Murphy just said, is that AI is very good at finding correlations, but it's not very good at determining if there's an actual causation there, which is kind of a fundamental thing in science. And it's not very easy to understand how it came up with the correlation. So one of the pushes right now, and you may be hearing this term, is explainable AI. It's the National Science Foundation, for example, is promoting programs for this. So we don't just want to learn what the patterns are or what correlations it's found, but can it explain how it got to that result? Because it's very different than sort of traditional standard ways of doing that, which we would have like maybe a statistical model, at the end of which we actually have a formula, and we can see sort of how much the various different factors are coming into play in the relationship and so forth. So I think that's one of the main areas that it's lacking in right now.
Thank you for that question. And so I'm going to ask it sort of out of order. So the next question is, can soft tissue injury be detected by X-ray, or only MRI can?
Only MRI.
Short and sweet. Only MRI. Well, so now this question can be for both of you. For young students who are interested in getting in the science sports field, what advice would you give them? And
do you want to go first, Megan?
Yeah, I'm thinking, what advice? That's a great question. I would say, oh my goodness. Don't limit yourself to just there. Sports can be like a lot of different disciplines can be applied to sport, right? So look for other things that you're interested in that could potentially apply. Like mathematics, for example, is not something most people would put together with sport, right? Physiology perhaps, but not even necessarily when you get into those degree programs. They're not always focusing on sport. So I would say explore, right? And be creative, and then find your way in that discipline that you love to sports, really. And then network, make connections. Yeah, that's the way in.
Yeah, I was gonna say that too. Networking is very important, and I really liked what you said about talking to your professors. That's an excellent point. A lot of students, when they get to college, they don't think they can talk to their professors. I don't know how that's come about, but that's unfortunately sometimes part of the culture. Really, the professors want to talk to you. So if you're curious about anything, then go talk to your professor in their office hours. They'll be very happy to talk to you. Would you mind, Devin, if I shared one slide? I've got some resources, and it could talk a little bit to that question as well. Let me put this in the display mode. So I'll leave this up here for a minute. So I put a link okay, there's some videos here that are just kind of about analytics in general, but particularly for sports, these are podcasts for people who work in analytics, but also in sports. So, for example, you can see one of them where it says Orioles Analytics. That's an interview with one of the assistant general managers of the Baltimore Orioles, and he talks about how his journey to getting into the sports field. And it's kind of similar to what Professor Murphy was just saying, was that you start out with, in this case, I think it was statistics, and he had a lot of training in that. And then this was just one application that he could do with statistics. And so I hope one of the big takeaways from today is that, so there are lots of ways that science and technology, math can apply to sports, but those skills that you would learn doing that are also, you can apply them to other things.
Thank you for that resource, Dr. Olenek. So that's the end of our question and answer portion. Again, if you have any questions for either one of our speakers, please make sure that you email me and I can relay those questions to them so that they can go ahead and give an answer. Again, these two individuals have a wealth of knowledge between them, so please, please, please use them. They just mentioned networking, so don't feel afraid to network with them, even though you're not at their schools just yet. So I'm going to share my screen for the last time, and here we go. And I just want to say thank you so much to our knowledgeable speakers once again, and another thank you to all of our sponsors, including the Claude Moore Charitable Foundation. And lastly, thank you for joining us today. You will be notified when this recording is posted on our YouTube channel. More information regarding our 2024 webinars will be sent out in the coming weeks, and we hope to see you there as we continue to grow within STEM Lyceums. So again, thank you so much. I'm going to